Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. This week's guest is fan and teacher Scott Barsamian. Scott contacted me a while ago about discussing Phish's first large-scale festival, the Clifford Ball. Now, when an attendance bias guest chooses a festival, I always get very hesitant because Phish festivals are so big and they loom so large in my imagination, plus in reality, that I become almost intimidated to take them on for an hour-long discussion. But once the guest and I talk for a bit, we usually narrow down highlights and figure out what's the best way to approach a festival. For today's episode, Scott chose to talk about the first day of the festival, August 16th, 1996, and to help whittle down the conversation, he picked one song from each of the three sets Phish played that day. And nowadays, we know exactly what to expect when Phish throws a festival, but in 1996, everything was pretty much brand new. My favorite part of this conversation was the part that took that angle. It was hearing about Scott's expectations as he traveled to the festival. Because Phish had never done anything on this scale before. What would they pull off? In 2021, we have the benefit of hindsight, but in 1996, it was a surprise to everybody, probably including the band. Also, throughout today's conversation, you may hear from two special guests. That would be my dog, Duncan, and Scott's dog, Roscoe, who couldn't help but contribute. So let's join Scott Barsamian to hear about the drive to Plattsburgh, Trey's Tone from 1996, and a confounding Harpua encore as we discuss Phish's performance on 8/16/96, day one of the Clifford Ball at the Plattsburgh Air Force Base in New York. Scott, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thanks for joining me today.
How you doing, Brian? Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to talking about the show that we're going to break down today. And what I just wanted to do real quick is just let everyone know that's listening that I'm a high school teacher, and I know that you're a teacher as well. And I know that a lot of us are going through year 3 of teaching through this pandemic. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I know that everyone's doing their best. And I just want to give everybody out there a big shout out who are teachers, my support, and just tell you that you got this. And at the end of the day, if you had a rough day, just remember that you could always listen to Phish.
I usually do.
Same here.
It's usually what gets me home, especially the show that you picked today. I've been listening to it all week and last week as well, because it's been a while since I've actually listened to this whole show straight through. And we're so lucky that on Phish.in, it's listed as a soundboard.
Mm-hmm.
And what a pleasure.
I was going to say this. Yeah, the soundboard quality for this show is great because I have a couple of different sources of this, and the go-to is just going to the soundboard.
And for anyone listening, in case you missed the introduction, the show that Scott and I are going to discuss today is August 16th, 1996, which was day one of the Clifford Ball, which was Phish's first festival. Phish's first large-scale festival, put it that way. But we'll get more into that during the context portion of this show. But Scott, I wanted to ask you a few questions to get to know you, and we'll do it in the same way that we normally do it on this show with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So Scott, to start off, when was your first Phish show?
First Phish show was December 30th, 1994 at Madison Square Garden.
That was one of my earliest tapes. I remember having it. And I also remember that was the first show I had that was the non-live one that had the Wilson chant at the beginning. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember specifically once the lights went out and the opening dun dun kicked off, just to hear the entire garden knowing that it's Wilson that they're chanting to. It's their first time playing MSG. It's sold out, and it was just such a great feeling to just see everybody was like, wow, we're seeing Phish, and they're at the Garden.
And how did you get into Phish before you went to go see them?
I started listening to Phish in high school. The first time I heard them was in someone's room at a party. We were listening to A Picture of Nectar, and I just remember that this was just such a different sound compared to what I was listening to. Because in high school, I was really into the Grateful Dead. I'm still into the Grateful Dead today. But I was seeing the Grateful Dead in high school. I knew people that started to see Phish, but I didn't really go along with seeing them because I was just more into seeing the Grateful Dead. And now in hindsight, thinking about how I could have started seeing Phish in 1991, You have the holy trinity of regret, woulda, shoulda, coulda. But after listening to them, I started getting some Phish fillers on dead tapes, and I eventually went out and bought a picture of Nectar, and then I started getting actual Phish bootlegs, and I'd say probably around 1992, when I really started getting more into Grateful Dead tape trading. That's when Phish shows actually started coming in, and I knew people that were trading Phish tapes, but I didn't really know that many people that were seeing them. And I was at the point in my life when I wasn't really comfortable driving down to a concert by myself, which completely changed once I started seeing the band. But once I got to college and I was away in 94, that's when I knew people were starting to see them. And that's when I had my chance to see them for Halloween, but the ticket fell through. And after that, once I saw him at the Garden, the rest is history.
So if December 30th, 94 was your first show, what was your most recent show as of today?
As of today, it was the last night of Atlantic City on August 15th.
What did you think of that run?
I thought the run was great. Couch touring each night, it just seemed like the shows were getting better and better, not because of the set list, but because of the playing. And I went to both nights of Hershey, had a blast. The second night of Hershey I thought was incredible. And for the Atlantic City run, it was just a great time. It's my first time seeing Phish on the beach. I'm hoping to maybe get to Mexico one of these days, but I just thought the overall vibe for Atlantic City was great, because even during the day when it was pretty hot and muggy, once the sun started to go down and you just felt the nice sea breeze coming in and you could walk barefoot in the sand, it was just great. I had a blast.
It was perfect. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. What, all else being equal, what is your favorite song?
My favorite song is Reba. This is something that can change day to day, but when I started getting into tape trading, one of the first shows that I got was from the Binghamton Forum, March 20th, 1992. And the copy that I have is actually soundboard, because there's an audience tape that goes around that's labeled as a soundboard. But the one that I have, when you compare it to the audience tape, you could tell that it's a soundboard. It was really rare at the time. Someone told me, "You're not going to believe that I have a soundboard of this tape." The opening Wilson is not on it. So the tape actually starts with the Reba, and Trey's guitar solo in that just got me hooked on the band even more. And every time I hear Reba, I just think back to that version, which is what really got me into the band.
If you had your druthers, would you choose to see Phish indoors or outdoors?
I love Phish indoors because I feel like the energy is contained and it just kind of like goes around the venue like a Super Bowl. And I think that you get a better visual with the lights. I like Phish outdoors when it's summer, but when I did the Baker's Dozen, I had no problem being indoors in the summer seeing Phish, especially at MSG.
Are you chasing any Phish songs?
The one song I'm chasing, because I'm a huge fan of their bluegrass catalog, I still have not heard Paul and Silas. I missed that, I think, by a night in 98 when I went to the Centrum shows in Worcester. I think it was the last night they actually played that in the first set. So that's one song that I'm just hoping to hear. Every other bluegrass song that they have in rotation, I've heard, and I have still not heard this one yet. So I'm hoping to catch it one day.
What's your favorite post-show snack?
It depends on what the what the season is, but usually in the summer, I love Mountain Dew. So I usually get something sweet. I'm known for bringing lots of snacks in my pockets. Usually during the holiday runs, I usually have a handful of clementines with me. I'll usually bring in some candy. And if it's the summer, one thing we did a lot after the Baker's Dozen, after the shows, was we would get a pizza. So it was just basically whoever wanted to pick their pizza place to eat, we would just get pizza. So I'm either getting something sweet or I'm having a couple of slices.
So you're the guy that everyone wants to sit next to during the show, especially at set break, to get some candy and some clementines.
There might be some people listening who over the years I might have fed, whether it was giving you a piece of my clementine or a Smartie. For the Baker's Dozen, I brought in a lot of Pez. Didn't have a dispenser, but just little teeny packs of Pez. And if someone usually watches you eat the Pez, that's when you usually hand one off. I mean, in Hershey, I had one of those big family, I think it's like the friend-size Starburst. It looks like the size of a lightsaber. It's gigantic. And the section I was at in Hershey for the first night, I was giving out Starbursts.
At my first couple of shows, it meant a little something different when someone offered you a Pez.
Mm-hmm.
Usually you had to ask them a couple questions before you accepted it, just to make sure that you would end your night okay.
Yeah, you want to make sure it's not a Pez that you're going to eat, and then for the next 12 hours, you have to make sure you're in a safe place.
Exactly. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
The weirdest thing I ever saw at a Phish show, I think about musically, was the way that the Clifford Ball ended with the Harpua, because I feel like at that point, and even going forward, I've seen so much stuff at Phish shows that you're kind of used to seeing. So I thought of the musical part, because I think in terms of, if you take somebody who's never been to a Phish show before and they're in the parking lot and they're walking around the venue before the show starts, and then if they have to happen to get stuck in one of the long bathroom lines during set break, for them, there's probably a lot of weirdness that I think for us is just something that we're used to. So I just thought more along the lines of the people that think about music, because what was kind of weird for me, like now that I think about it, it was the second day, I think, of it, when they ended the first set with Mike's Groove. Mm-hmm. And running through the crowd were three dudes with Groucho Marx glasses on. They had the big eyebrows, the big noses, and they were butt naked, just running around. And for me, it was more funny, but like now in hindsight, I guess I could say that was pretty weird. But I always think back to the way that Harpua ended for the Clifford Ball, and I'm like, wow, that was weird. But everything else at that point, like, you've seen stuff and you're like, I've seen this probably somewhere else.
It's funny you bring up the Groucho Marx glasses, the guys running through. We had a previous guest on Attendance Bias who chose it. I forget which day he chose, but he was certain, he remembers, because he was all the way up front. If you remember, the water tower had the Groucho Marx glasses on.
Yes.
It. He said that when he was up front, there were employees of Phish giving out hundreds of pairs of Groucho Marx glasses with the nose and the mustache attached, and that it was just some kind of gag that everyone would get a pair, just keep, passing them back, and everyone would have Groucho Marx glasses. I don't have any memory of that at all, but he's sure that it was part of the whole weekend, the whole show, that the water tower was kind of a reflection of the way that they wanted everyone to have a pair of those same glasses. So now that adds a little bit of credence. I'll have to get back in touch with him after this.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I just thought these were three random dudes that just decided, hey, when we pack our car, we'll throw in 3 pairs of Groucho Marx glasses and let's just get naked at some point and just run around the crowd.
Which also could be the case.
You never know. At a Phish show, anything's possible.
When was this show played?
By the time I got to experience Festival Phish, which was it, in 2003, they had the whole festival format and template down to a science. Everyone knew what to expect. Tremendous traffic going in was just now part of the game. Typically, it was 3 sets a day. Festival Phish tends to be the best Phish, depending on your perspective, but I think it's pretty hard to argue. But this was many years before that. Now in 3.0, we've gotten used to Indio and Super Ball and Magna Ball. But back in 1996, at the end of the summer, this was the first large-scale festival that they had that kind of set up what we know today. And Phish has always desired to break out of the typical concert setups. I think they've always wanted to play by their own rules, not just musically speaking, in that their songs don't fit a particular genre, not just business-wise, that they don't need to be on the radio, but also in terms of what a concert could be. And that goes back to 1987 when they had a big concert at Ian McLean's farm. Also in 1991 when they played the famous Amy's Farm show, or any other kind of do-it-yourself sort of playing in a field setup. Those are always the best Phish experiences, in my opinion. And the Clifford Ball, so it had precursors, even if it didn't have any real precedence. It was the first of its kind. You could draw a straight line from the Clifford Ball to Bonnaroo. I think it's pretty obvious. But any number of modern music festivals today kind of got started with the Clifford Ball, in my opinion, in the modern era, at least. What do you remember about going there?
I remember, first off, when it was announced that there's going to be this big Phish festival. At this point, it was 1996. I had plenty of tapes at this point in my collection. And I also remember for some of the tapes, like you just mentioned, you had Amy's Forum, which you could call like an early festival. You have, the one that you mentioned from 87. There was another one from 89. The name is slipping me right now.
Was it Townsend Park, or was it Battery Park in Vermont?
826, 89. Yeah, Townsend Park outdoors. And then they did another one, I think, 6/16/90 was another one that they did outside. And I just remember thinking that you're talking about shows back then that were, size-wise a lot smaller compared to what the Clifford Ball was. But we knew that once that this was announced, that a lot of people were going to be showing up there, and knowing that this was going to be probably the biggest concert that they had played up to that point. I think not only were people's expectations high of what the band was going to play, but just knowing that you're going to be going to something really special. And what you just said, which I think is so true, a lot of the bigger music festivals that take place now, Coachella, Bonnaroo, it's really cool to just know that Phish basically put the concrete into the foundation for this. And they basically said, this is how you do it, and this is how you're going to do it right. And since then, it's been great.
Yeah, and I don't mean to intimate that Phish invented festivals. Of course not. Going all the way back to Monterey Pop in 1967 or Woodstock, of course. Just this idea of kind of what we've come to experience starts in the modern era with the Clifford Ball. I guess that's really the big part of it, the modern era. And I wanted to state some facts and join in, add any thoughts, anything you want to add. Just some basic facts about the Clifford Ball. It was held in Plattsburgh, New York, on the Plattsburgh Air Force Base. And for a lot of fans who don't know, or who are used to driving to Watkins Glen, at least in more recent times, Plattsburgh is not easy to get to. People think New York and, East Coast show. It's not really in that category. Anyone who's been to Plattsburgh, it's all the way north. When you talk about upstate New York, it is about as up as you can go.
It's a hike.
Yeah. It's not central New York. I think Watkins Glen could easily be considered either southern tier or central New York. But Plattsburgh is 60 miles south of Montreal, and it's right across the lake from Burlington. It's pretty high up there.
I mean, even today, when you hear that people went to school in Plattsburgh, you knew that you were way far north, and you know that it's cold. In the winter, it's cold up there. Lots of snow, lots of skiing. But like you just said, it wasn't something that was a hop, skip, and a jump away. It was without traffic. I think Plattsburgh for me is maybe five-ish hours, 6 hours, and now you're talking about people who are coming from all different parts of the country, especially people who are just coming from the night that they did in Hershey on the 14th. So people that were already doing a lot of driving, this was just another, big chunk to just put onto the odometer.
And that's part of it too. That's part of the tradition of their festivals, that it's in a place that is kind of remote. And that might not be true for Indio, actually, now that I think about it, but it's a place where you're kind of separated from society for a weekend. And there's this wonderful feeling of the rest of the world doesn't matter for all intents and purposes. At this time, there were no cell phones. Let's not forget, once you got in the car, once you got through the gates, it was you and whoever you were with and Phish.
And your wits. You definitely had to have, because, I was going to say with your wits, because you said with no map. I remember driving to the Clifford Ball, and we had a map in the car because we just knew, this is the road that you have to take to get up to Plattsburgh. And as you got closer, I remember that there were signs. But when you think about people going to a festival today, just punch the address into Waze or Google Maps, whatever your GPS server is of your choice, and it's going to take you there. But going back in the day without technology like we have today, you definitely had to have a little bit of some, directional common sense as well.
Nuts and bolts about the Clifford Ball. Phish played 3 sets per day for 2 days. along with a lengthy sound check on the eve of the festival. After the second set, the first night, they played their first secret set, which was the famous flatbed jam, where they played soft ambient music on top of a flatbed truck while being driven around the campgrounds. Did you get to experience any of that, or did that happen when you found out about it later?
I found out about it the next day. I remember waking up in the morning and some people who were in their tents next to us were chattering, and they're like, "You're not going to believe what happened." They're like, it was about 3:34 in the morning. And they're like, up pops a flatbed truck and the band was playing. So of the festivals that I went to, the one that I'll always remember, and I think you mentioned that you went to it, when they did the Tower Jam, my tent was literally a rock's throw away. Like, I was so close to it. So after they finished the first show and everybody went back to their campsites after in their tents, I just remember sitting in my what type of chair? Cabin Creek chair? Crazy Creek chair, the one that pulled up. Yeah. I just remember sitting in that. I was having a beer, and all of a sudden the lights on the tower just went off. And I'm like, if this is their thing right now, if this is the added set, I'm like, I'm right here. And we just sat back and we were just right there, literally front row from there. It was great.
That's so lucky. My campsite at it was roughly a mile away from the playing fields, from the concert area. So I slept completely through it. I had no idea that it happened. Although I was thrilled. Tapes. Yeah, thank God for tapes and DVDs. Speaking of which, the Clifford Ball has been released in its entirety on DVD. So we're lucky enough for that too. Something I was really curious to ask you about, and anyone who attended the Clifford Ball, it's really easy for us now to look back and say, what an incredible weekend, what an incredible show. It must have been so great to have been there. And a common sentiment that I've heard from a lot of fans is that when they arrived and Phish took the stage and they looked around, that seemed to be a turning point for a lot of fans, that it wasn't our small band anymore. Like, they're not really a cult band anymore. Even if they're not mainstream, and they still aren't, they're not a secret. It sounds like for a lot of people, the Clifford Ball was when a lot of people realized just how many of us there actually were.
We knew going up there that it was going to be big, because we figured if they're on an Air Force base, they're definitely expecting tens of thousands of people. So we were thinking, how many people are going to actually go here? Because like you just said, being on the Northeast, that's definitely where a big chunk of their fan base was at the time. And I just remember when we were finally getting closer to the entrance to the venue, you could already see the campgrounds, you could see all the vending, and you just saw all of these people who were already there. And then you look in your rearview mirror and you just see the traffic that's in back of you for people who are waiting to get in, just like you are. And I just remember thinking, this is incredible, just based on how many people are here and how many more people are on their way. So we just could not get over the fact how big this was. So as far as the amount of people that were showing up to see the band for 2 nights was just, it was mind-blowing to us just how many people were there. Because if you look at different sites out there, some people said 60,000 showed up. So I think there was one site that said 70,000. If you're able to draw more than 50,000 people outdoors for a weekend to camp, you definitely have people who are that dedicated to just say to themselves, you know what, I don't mind sleeping in a tent for 2 nights and then hearing 6 sets of music. So we just couldn't get over just how many people were there. And just knowing that you were a part of this just felt special, because you knew that like this was like the granddaddy of all Phish concerts that they had played up to at that point, as far as the amount of people that showed up. And as far as the festival goes, when you go from something like Amy's Farm to now the Clifford Ball, just the magnitude of just how big it was and how many more people came to it was just something that when in hindsight now, like I still can't believe just how it was almost like everyone's jaws collectively just hit the floor when they showed up and said to themselves, wow, look at how big this is as far as the people and just how big the band was.
And it shouldn't go without noticing that they were the only band there.
Yes, no opening act, no nothing. I mean, I remember before I was going to go to the concert, some of my friends who weren't going, they're like, what are you doing for the weekend? I'm like, we're going to the Clifford Ball to see a Phish festival. Well, who else is going to play there? Just Phish. And people are like, really? Just Phish? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, they're able to do that. I actually, I kept a journal in college and I was looking through it and I have a little blurb about, I went to the Clifford Ball and it was really hot, but I remember in the evenings, I mean, the weather was great. It rained a little bit, I think, going into the first day. I remember waking up and I think it might've sprinkled, but it was really hot, but at night it got really cool. Cause also, you're way up north. And aside from that little bit of rain that we got, the weather was just perfect.
And so to get a little more personal, who were you with? What was it like? What led you to the Clifford Ball?
I was there with my roommate from college and his friend, and they actually did the 2 nights at Deer Creek on the 12th and the 13th. And then they went to Hershey. And I remember when they picked me up, they were just exhausted from driving from Indiana, 2 nights of Phish in Indiana, then driving from Indiana to Hershey, Pennsylvania. Then from Hershey, Pennsylvania, they drove to my house in New York. And I just remember when they picked me up, they were just exhausted, but they were just kind of running on fumes at this point because they were so excited that we were all going to be going up to see the festival. And I remember on the ride up, they were so beat that they're like, we need to stop and rest. So we actually stopped at a hotel for a bit so they could just go to sleep. And I remember being in the hotel and I had my little cassette Walkman with my, with the little fuzzy headphones on the side. I just remember I was listening to music in the hotel room and I just couldn't sleep because I was just so excited to know that we were going to be seeing Phish at a festival. And it was just nice to know that this was like a nice change of pace from being to, like either an outdoor amphitheater or an indoor arena. It's like, we're going to be outdoors and we're going to be seeing Phish for the weekend. So I just really was just so fired up at that point.
There was a tremendous amount of music played at this festival. So when you and I were going back and forth over email, I thought it would be a bit too much, a bit too big of a bite to cover every single song that was played. So we narrowed it down that you picked one day of the festival, the first day, the 16th, and that we would pick one song from each set and then go over each one. And you picked 3 fabulous songs. And when I looked them up to listen, it only made sense that each one is about 15 minutes long, each track. Mm-hmm. So even 3 songs is about as much as, I don't know, 2/3 of a full set of any other show. So the 3 songs that you picked were Divided Sky, Mike's Song, and Down with Disease. I have to ask, is if there's a different story for each or just something total, why you have attendance bias toward these songs?
For these 3 songs, I just remember specifically how I felt. I remember what the music did to me and listening to them after the show was over, when the tapes started coming out, and then particularly when the DVD box set came out, watching it and being able to now see visual of what you were able to see and just the way that the sound was captured. And it just gives you a really good perspective of what the whole weekend was like. But the one thing that really just stood out for me was that on the first day, especially for Divided Sky, is the sun was going down. I just felt it was just a perfect placement for that song, especially when they had all the little, not the little things, but they had some of the, like the acrobatics taking place in the air with the planes and stuff. And it was just something that just stood out to me because once they started that, I just felt like, wow, this is it. I mean, the songs that they played before that were great, great versions. But for me, Divided Sky was just the perfect placement for as the sun was going down.
And it was just the 6th song of the whole festival. They had just opened the whole weekend. It was just the 6th song. And the first thought I had when I hit play was, I miss Trey's tone from 1996.
Yes, I was gonna say, because even when you watch the video, he's got the Mar guitar, so it's every guitar that he has now has the different sound to it and the different tone. But like one of the things about his tone on this is that it's, to me, with that guitar, even though it's 1996, it's still old school Phish to me.
100%.
Especially with that sound.
There's something about his tone that it is unique to him. And that came through 1000% with this Divided Sky.
No, definitely. I just hear, when I hear that version, I mean, you can listen to a Divided Sky from this year, last year, and anything from, the 1.0 era, especially when he's playing that guitar. There's just something so distinctive about it, the bite that it has, the way that it sounds, and the overall experience of that song and that guitar is just great. I mean, when you just watch him pick and just work the fretboard with his fingers, it's like, to me, it's like it's eye magic to just watch what this guy is doing with the guitar.
And they were playing extremely fast. You could hear a little bit of nervousness in the music at this point.
I agree with that, because I'm curious. I mean, if you could ask any of the band members now, hey, can you tell me what it was like once you walked out on the stage for the first day of the Clifford Ball? What was the first thing to go through your mind when you see 60,000 people who are all there to just watch the four of you play? And it'd be interesting to see what they would have to say. But I feel like over the course of that night, I just felt, when we get to the other songs, how I feel like they were relaxed and loosened up at that point. And I feel like with that nervousness, I feel like as a way to try to like beat that nervousness, it's like, let's just play harder, because there are parts of that song where it just rips.
Yeah, absolutely. When they finish the song proper, there's about 7 minutes left in the track once that ending jam starts, that incredible type one, put more gas on it and just keep building until we get to the very, very end. And holy shit, this is just, everything gets thrown at the wall. When you talk about playing harder, the last 7 minutes of this Divided Sky is a masterclass in that. Do you remember the jam that came out of this toward the end?
Yeah, I just remember that it just kept getting better. And aside from the jam, like the one thing that really just stood out to me was the pause, because the pause when there was just, the four of them standing on the stage. And like one of the things I described to people about just what the allure of Phish is, it's the pause. You have four guys standing on stage in silence, and you have 65,000 people just getting off at this. And I can't think of any other band out there where you could have four guys, or whoever the members of the band are, four people standing on stage in silence during a song, and people are screaming as if it would be like the peak of a song. And that's just one of the things that Phish is just able to do.
I can't imagine what it was like during the pause. It must have reached right into your heart.
It was one of those moments where you definitely knew that just everything was all happening, and it was just a perfect moment because, and anytime you get a nice sunset, aesthetically, it's great to look at. This was one of those moments where you have just like this, it's aesthetically arresting to you. Like, it's just one of those things that just makes you stop and just appreciate it, and just knowing that, everybody's there for the same reason. And, even though it's the silent part, the fans, they're screaming, it's their love, it's their appreciation. And I felt like collectively, everybody at that point during that moment of the song were like, okay, we're here, we're going to do our thing. And like you were saying, it's six songs in. And, you're thinking of like, wow, we still have 5.5 sets of music to go. We still have the rest of this set. We got set 2, set 3. Nobody knew that the special set was going to take place late night. And then you wake up the next day on the 17th and you're like, wow, we got 3 more sets of Phish coming.
It's the best feeling at a festival, isn't it? You don't want to find yourself counting down the sets, but when it hits you, how much there is left, it's like Christmas morning.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's like, wow, all right. You're looking at the tree and you have all these presents. You're like, all right, you still have to open these up. But looking at the tree is just one of those things that just really hits you.
Right. I love that at the end, after Divided Sky is over, it's the very end of the track that's on Phish.in, where Trey says in this very childlike, charming way, he says,
"Thanks, everybody. Welcome."
Yeah. And, because, this was also during the time during the ball. I mean, there really isn't that much banter, like there's the part when they introduced Ben and Jerry. And I just remember when he welcomed everybody was just wanting more once that song ended, because I just keep thinking back to just how great, and as you were mentioning, like the last 7 minutes, it's just an incredible version. I know a couple of nights before, I think it was the 13th of Deer Creek on 8/13 when they opened up with Divided Sky. I mean, that's an incredible version. Listening to Divided Sky, Clifford Ball, just, for me, the bias is it's like, hey, I was there to witness this particular version. And especially if you ever happen to watch the video from the box set, when Trey's just standing there, and there are a couple of great camera shots where you just look out to see this gigantic sea of people, and everybody is there, feeling the same thing in one way or another, where you're like, wow, it's Divided Sky, the sun's going down, and I'm here for a Phish festival for the weekend.
For set 2, you chose to discuss Mike's song. And when they started this one up, it's unbelievable when you look at the set list. And maybe you could speak to this a little bit, because they played a little like acoustic session in the middle of the set. And then they did an a cappella Hello, My Baby in front of 60,000 people. This is kind of nuts to play an acoustic set in front of 60,000 people. I mean, imagine if the Rolling Stones did that, how that would be received. And then they sing an a cappella song. And I guess Mike's song is one way to kind of change the palette entirely.
Yeah, it was definitely a nice way to end the set, because they did a couple of the new acoustic songs. They did Waste, they did Train Song, they did Strange Design. And then with the a cappella, it's not that it brought the vibe down. I just felt like the energy that people want, especially knowing that after they do the a cappella song, it's like, okay, let's go into something next. And, with the opening notes of Mike's song, with the way that, especially like we've been talking about with Trey's old tone, to just crank into that song. And
he's excited.
Roscoe, please stop. Why couldn't I have a cat today? So anyways, yeah. So just the way that the song started off with, Trey's old tone, the way that they cranked right into the song. And, the one thing that is interesting about the Mike song on this night is that when we were talking about how they had the first jam, and as they start to go into the second jam, it's just nice to hear, like when you listen to it now, just like what an old school version of Mike's song sounds like.
Well, yeah, I had that thought, and we'll get to the second jam, because, oh my God, this second jam. But even before that, like you were just saying, what an old school Mike song sounds like. Let's remember, this was right around the time that fan group PLM, if you remember that, People for a Louder Mic, a bunch of fans almost petitioned, or it was kind of a joke in a way, but also not. But it was like a joke with kind of a serious intention, where there were stickers and petitions at shows where people were asking Paul Languedoc to turn up Mike's bass. That songs like this Mike song, when he gets the ball, during the do 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 do, now it shakes the whole arena in 2021.
Yeah, you feel it in your chest. Yeah, that's something where like actually it could if someone's heart started to flutter, like it could actually fix that, because it goes right through you.
But when you listen to it for this show at the Clifford Ball and many versions before it, it sounds kind of weightless. It sounds, dare I say, a little weak for the amount of weight that's being put on it in the context of the song. It's his song.
Mm-hmm. The one thing about just talking about the bass, it's like the loudness of his tone, if you had it back then the way it was today, the way that it sounded today, I think it would probably just add so many more layers to the song, and it would definitely be a higher stacked sundae that you could put the cherry on top of, because it definitely needed more. We definitely needed more Mike in the mix for that, but the song still works. I just felt that for that particular version, just the directions that it went, and just the different sounds that we got from it, and the playing overall. Like, the one thing for this particular song is that I was really focused on the way that Page and Phish were playing together, and there are just so many moments during this song where they just work together in sync so well.
They do, and everyone does. Around 5 minutes or 6 minutes, Trey is really leading this type 1 jam. The first jam in Mike's, which is always kind of type 1, things get a little more democratic, and I heard Page really step forward on the piano especially, and on the organ at around 6 minutes. It's really hard not to focus on Trey's guitar because he's so dominant at this time, but Page comes through, and then Mike is not really audible. I mean, he's audible, but he's not really as part of the mix as the other 3 band members are.
Yeah, I put down that right at around 7 minutes or so, because I was actually looking. I listened to the CD that I have. The soundboard that I have on my computer, and then I also just went to the videotape for what's on YouTube, and I have down right at about 7 minutes. I just put down, "We want Mike." Like, we want to hear him more. It's like, look, we know that Mike's there, but we want to hear him in our ears more.
around 8 minutes, there's guitar theatrics that are like super speed, but there aren't a lot of clear ideas developed. The jam charts on Phish.net say the long first jam is crisp and well played, but it covers pretty familiar territory. And that I agree with that 1,000%. It's nothing we haven't heard before, even though it's still thrilling.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's almost like your textbook mics from that point at the way that the band was playing it. Going back to Page, I just kept listening on just the way that he was playing, because you could also, aside from hearing it, you were also able to see him on the screens. And it just seemed like he just seemed to be so focused on leading the song, because with Trey doing his playing, I felt that what Page was doing with his playing, he was kind of taking the song into his own direction. And the way that he was also playing, I felt was great, was just the way that Phish complimented him so well. Like the keyboards and piano on, that night, especially for that song, with the way that Phish actually played in together, I just thought just worked so well. They just complimented each other just so perfectly.
For sure. And the second jam, the second Mike's jam, I was driving around today, driving around a neighborhood that I've worked in for about 15 years. I lived there for 10 years, and I missed my turn because I was so into the second jam. I was so enveloped in it that around like 12 and a half minutes, there's this like Phish has been replaced by Led Zeppelin. Basically, this awesome, powerful rock. I mean, I'm not a headbanger. I barely dance at all, actually. But if I were there, my face would be melting, to use a cliche. Like, this is the type of mics that I love from the mid 90s. It's like before 46 Days came around, this was their big time arena rock song.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because right about that time when I listened to it, I think for the third time, I just put down, yes, don't stop, keep going. I want more.
Yeah.
It's almost like that's the spot. Keep at it. Keep going. Keep going.
It's like Roscoe when you're petting him behind the ear, probably.
Oh, yeah. He needs some of that after this. He's got to calm down.
And then at the end of Mike's, this really took me back. If we were in 1996 during the first and second jam, the very end of this took us back to like 1990 to 1992, where there's this weird vocal accompaniment is a polite word I'll use for it. It's like remnants of the early and mid 90s, like when they would get super weird. I'm thinking of Long Tweezers from like 1994, when they would stretch it out and do weird vocal jams in the middle, or Trey would imitate his guitar with his voice and do weird things like that. They did some weird singing along that's not dissonant. It kind of fits in, but it's not exactly strong either. It's like it kind of straddles that weird line, which is Phish, because it's totally weird.
Because the more you listen to it, because you can kind of hear the way that Trey's guitar tone is going. You could kind of hear Simple a little bit before they officially go into it, but when they're doing the like, it just it works. And I put down just what you were saying when you're going back into the earlier days, a few years before, when you're talking about the flavor of Phish. For this is just that old school flavor, and you could just tell by this also just how much fun they're having. And vocally, by doing this and through the music, you could just hear it. And like the fun that I felt that they were having that night, like for everybody, it was almost palpable, because it just seemed like everybody was just having the best time.
And like you said earlier, they got more relaxed and better musically speaking, as the night went on. And that's definitely encapsulated by the song you chose for the third set, Down with Disease, which was, for at least 3 years, the go-to song. I would say from 1994 to 1996, this was the Phish song.
Yes, I agree, especially when it came out. I remember hearing it on the radio for the first time. And then I remember hearing it live. You could totally tell the difference because, you have to, just say it what it is. It's like Down with Disease is not a radio friendly song. Like when it came out on the album, they played it. Okay, it got the airtime. But when you listen to what it became live, it's definitely not what it was when it was recorded in the studio. But, the interesting thing about this particular version is that I felt listening to it, it's nothing like some of the powerful versions that people know about. We're in 1996. The song is, almost, it's a little bit over 2 years old. And there were some really big versions from 95. There's there's the really short, and hot, Hershey 95 one. There's the big one that they did in SPAC. But the one thing I noticed about this particular song that night was that it didn't really stretch out the way some of those other versions did or have the intensity, but I felt by the playing and just how animated Trey was watching him, you could just tell how much fun he was having with it. And for me, watching Trey going from side to side when he's rocking back and forth, and you could just tell what a blast he's having. I felt that like the fun that he had and was having was just channeling into everybody else. And that was that was the reason why, particularly for this song, I just remember, look at how much fun they're having. And I just remember how much fun I was having. And like, during the show and you're looking around at everybody else, you could just tell that everybody was just in a zone. And I felt that the playing for this song just showed it.
Yeah. And even without the video, you could hear it. After the song itself is over and they go into the jam, the first thing that I noticed was they didn't drop down a couple octaves like they normally do to get Down with Disease jam started. They just kind of, like you said, rode this groove and played around with it. And the tempo stays the same for almost the whole thing.
Song I felt just flowed, and there was no real point where like they really started to hit like a big tension part of the jam that's just going to keep building and building, and you're just waiting for them to just kick it up another notch. Like I felt like this song, like if you wanted to like do it like as a metaphor, it was just like this river that just flowed. And like
I'm an English teacher, I love metaphors.
There were no parts where like, it started to maybe narrow a little bit or maybe, lose some of its intensity. I just felt like from beginning to end, it just flowed and it just worked because when we get to it, like at the very ending, I felt that maybe that could have been the part of the song when they could have maybe taken it someplace else and built it up. But from, right after Trey does his little riff, and they just started getting into the tempo of it. It just stayed at this one level, and it just works so well.
Maybe I thought this is what I mean when I frequently call 1996 a transition year. I don't mean it as an insult, but this jam doesn't have much forward thrust. It's more just determined playing.
No, I agree with that. That's a great way to describe that. It's interesting how you say that, because like when you're talking about how you have that transitional part. The one thing I put down, and this is what I just remember from, being there and from just watching Trey on stage, like as he's going side to side, I just think about that part from Bittersweet Motel when he's describing the scene from Pumping Iron with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there's that one part of the song where it's about maybe 6 minutes, and as he's actually rocking side to side, I just put down cue Arnold in Pumping Iron. I said he's coming. The audience is getting off. So it's like, aside from Trey getting off, the audience is, and from that little riff that he does, it's like the do 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 do. And it works so well. And like, as he's doing that, as mellow as it sounds, Page at times I felt like was kind of pounding the piano the way he would like at the beginning of Bathtub Gin. Like he just seemed so focused and just so into what he was doing. And I felt that like he was leading that part of the jam for a while. I just felt that he was really, really locked in, really good aggressive playing. And while that's going on, again, listen to how Fishman is just complimenting what Page is playing.
Yeah, Fishman we've kind of ignored for this whole discussion. Not ignored, but we haven't paid as much attention to him as we have to the other band members. At around 10 and a half minutes, there's some crazy fun drum work by Fishman. And this is something that continually astounds me, that he somehow always holds the beat while still playing impossible fills. He's two drummers in one, at least two drummers.
No, definitely. I was going to say, if you want to make the comparison of just taking a double drummer band and just squishing them together, you're going to get yourself a John Fishman, because again, with what Page was doing towards the end of the song, the way that Fishman was keeping the beat, and like you said, he's putting in these little rolls and these other little sounds, whether he's using his feet or the actual sticks, it just works so well. Once you start getting to the end of the song, there's almost this little bit of a moment where you're like, I think they're going to start to raise it up a little bit, but they didn't. But again, everything just works so well for that part.
Toward the end of the jam, things start, we've spent this whole time saying that this version of Down with Disease doesn't really experiment very much, but toward the very end, around 12 and a half minutes, Trey does find some new chords and new directions. And my first thought when I was listening and I looked up to look at the bar, the timing of the track, I said, oh, we're at the end of the jam already. Too bad that, they're just starting to discover now. ignoring that we're already 12 and a half minutes into a song, which is about 4 times as long as most other bands.
Exactly. And they still have a couple more minutes to go for that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And so he starts having space and power chords. I almost, in my wildest dreams, pictured them playing Sparks. They didn't, but I wish.
Yeah, I was going to say, I put down, for my notes, I said Disease, Sparks, and ICU would have been a nice treat, because at the very end, there's that tone and that sound that Trey has where it's like do 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 do, and it definitely sounds like something of Pete Townsend. You could definitely hear like that Pete Townsend vibe coming out of that, and for Sparks to have come out of Down with Disease, that would have been great. The way that the song ends and goes right into an ICU, it's a great transition. But if you want to talk about a great Spark sandwich, like Down with Disease and ICU would definitely be 2 good pieces of bread to put it in between.
Get your Homer Simpson saying Spark sandwich. Scott Barsamian, thank you so much for coming on Attendance Bias today to take us back in time effectively, to take us from something that we know, we expect, we love of a modern Phish festival, and taking us back to, as I've said, in the modern era, where it all began at the Clifford Ball. I have to ask before we say goodbye, is there anything about the Clifford Ball, music aside, the rest of all 3 sets, is there anything about it that we didn't get to touch on, like a story you've always wanted to tell about the Clifford Ball, or some emotion you've always wanted to express?
The one thing about the Clifford Ball is that I remember when we were leaving the next day, is that the people I was with and people I was talking to, walking out, getting to our cars and just packing up, everybody that I spoke to wished that there could have been another day of music. So the 3-day festivals that we've gotten used to later in their career, it's nice. Like I think back to the last festival I was at was at Magna Ball, and I'm like, it's great, 3 days of Phish. And back then, everybody that I spoke to just wanted more. And
hopefully soon enough, we'll get more.
Again, fingers and toes are crossed. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on. And for everyone out there listening who are also teachers, you got this. Do your best. And like I said earlier, if you have a bad day when you come home, you always have Phish. And you can have Phish on your lunch break too. That's what I've been doing lately.
And that's it for my conversation today with teacher and fan Scott Barsamian. And to make sure we have everything on the up and up, let's check in with the Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Scott said that he's chasing Paul and Silas, and he missed it by 1 show at the Worcester Centrum in 1998. The date he's talking about is on November 29th. It was played at the Centrum that year. Scott also said that the weirdest thing he's ever seen at a Phish show was at the Clifford Ball when Harpua ended the festival. Oddly enough, Harpua was the encore of the whole festival. According to legend, the band had hired a stunt plane to do tricks in coordination with the performance of Harpua. However, the plane allegedly never got the musical cue and the stunt was not completed. As a result, Harpua remained unfinished as the band left the stage, and it was not completed until the beginning of the next festival in 1997, The Great Went. About midway through our conversation, I got a little bit confused about previous guests on Attendance Bias when Scott brought up the naked guys at IT running through the crowd wearing Groucho Marx glasses. Our friend Nathan Toby chose to discuss day one of it on attendance bias, but he did not bring up the Groucho Marx glasses. Instead, that was Dave Lutz, who was on early in the series to discuss Camp Oswego. When talking about Phish's precursors to the Clifford Ball and makeshift festivals, Scott and I talked about Ian's Farm from 1987, Amy's Farm from 1991, and then Scott brought up, quote, that one from 1989. He was referring to Phish's 3-set show at Townsend Family Park in Townsend, Vermont on August 26, 1989. That show was released as part of the Live Phish series as Live Phish 9. And while discussing banter, or the lack thereof, at the Clifford Ball, Scott brings up the part with Ben and Jerry. To explain that a little bit, on the second day of the festival, ice cream moguls Ben and Jerry came on stage to sing the chorus of Brother with incredibly off-key vocals. I'm not saying I do any better, but I love their ice cream, but I'm not buying their album anytime soon. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. Thank you to Scott Barsamian for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the soundboard recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app, and go ahead, follow Attendance Bias on social media, mostly on Instagram and Twitter. If you reach out and say hello, I'll send you a free sticker. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next week on Attendance Bias.